I stood in front of Jesus Christ after being dead for 6 minutes and asked him the one question that had tormented me for years. Why does God ignore the prayers of millions of Christians who love him? But what he showed me was so devastating, so different from anything I had ever heard preached from any pulpit, that when I came back to my body, I could not speak for 3 days. Have you ever been so certain that God was listening to your prayers that you never once considered the real reason he might be silent? My name is Salma Faris Al-Haddad. I am 30 years old, and on March 3rd, 2023, I was pronounced clinically dead at St. Joseph's Hospital in Amman, Jordan, after my heart stopped during a reaction to anesthesia during what should have been a routine procedure. I had no idea that in those 6 minutes of death, Jesus would show me something about prayer that would shatter everything I believed and everything millions of Christians believe about why their prayers go unanswered. I was born in the Shweifi neighborhood of Amman, one of the oldest Christian communities in Jordan. Our family apartment sat on a quiet street 3 blocks from the Church of the Sacred Heart. Every Sunday morning, the church bells would echo through our open windows, and my mother would say, "God is calling us." My father, Butros Faris Al-Haddad, was a deacon at the church who had served faithfully for over 25 years. He was a pharmacist by profession, but a man of prayer above all else. My mother, Rania, sang in the church choir and organized the women's prayer circle every Tuesday evening. She kept a prayer journal with leather covers so worn they were soft as cloth. She wrote in it every single day without exception. My grandmother had been one of the founding members of the women's ministry at our church. Prayer was not just something my family did, it was who we were. We prayed before every meal, before every journey, before every decision. We were a family built on the absolute certainty that God heard every word. While other girls my age were watching television and talking about pop stars, I was kneeling beside my mother learning to pray. By the time I was 12, I had memorized dozens of psalms and could recite the Lord's Prayer in Arabic, English, and Greek. I never missed a Sunday service, not even the time I had such a severe flu that my father had to carry me to the car. During Lent, I fasted with a discipline that impressed women 3 times my age. The priest once placed his hand on my head after a particularly long prayer meeting and said, "God has given your parents a daughter with the soul of a saint." I prayed every morning before sunrise. I prayed every evening before sleep. I prayed silently at school, on the bus, while walking through the markets. I had no idea that there was something deeply broken in how I prayed, and that millions of Christians carried the same fracture without ever knowing it. But my faith, as real as it was, had a wound I never examined. I prayed constantly, yet nothing in my life seemed to change. I prayed for my father's back pain to heal. It only got worse. I prayed for my older brother Sammy to come back to the church after he stopped attending. He never returned. I prayed for peace in my own heart, for the anxiety that had gripped me since childhood to loosen its hold. It only tightened. I watched my mother fill journal after journal with prayers, and I watched her grow more tired and more discouraged with every passing year, though she never admitted it. The women in her prayer circle would gather and weep and plead with God for hours, and then they would go home to the same problems, the same pain, the same silence from heaven. Nobody talked about it. That was the unspoken rule. You did not question whether God was listening. You just prayed harder. By 27, I had graduated from the University of Jordan with a degree in accounting. I was working at a financial firm in Amman. I was engaged to a faithful Christian man named George, whose family had been part of our church for generations. I had stability, a career, a future mapped out with the precision of a spreadsheet. I had everything. But underneath all of it, I carried a question I was terrified to speak out loud. Why was God silent? Ask yourself this question. Have you ever built your entire life on something you were completely sure would never break? The question grew louder in the months before my surgery. I had started to notice something that disturbed me deeply. I would sit in church on Sunday and listen to people share prayer requests. Healing for a sick child, restoration of a broken marriage, financial provision during a crisis. And week after week, I watched those same people return with the same requests. Nothing changed. The sick child was still sick. The marriage was still broken. The bills were still unpaid. And yet, nobody questioned it. Nobody asked the obvious question. Why were the prayers of devoted, faithful, Bible-believing Christians going unanswered by the millions? The thought haunted me. I could not shake it. I began to wonder if something was fundamentally wrong, not with God, but with the way we were approaching Him. I had no idea that God Himself was about to answer that question in the most dramatic and terrifying way possible. On March 3rd, 2023, I went to St. Joseph's Hospital for a minor outpatient procedure to remove a cyst from my abdomen. The doctors assured me it would take less than 40 minutes. My mother sat in the waiting room reading her Bible. George had kissed my forehead before the nurses wheeled me back. Everything was normal. Then it was not. 3 minutes after the anesthesia entered my bloodstream, my body reacted. My throat began to swell. My blood pressure dropped. The monitors erupted in alarms. I remember a nurse shouting and the overhead light stretching into a long white line. Then silence. Complete silence. My heart stopped at exactly 10:14 in the morning. I was dead for 6 minutes. The first thing I felt was warmth. Not hospital warmth. Living warmth, like being wrapped in sunlight that had a pulse. I was standing in a place with no walls and no horizon, only light, golden light that seemed to breathe. There was no pain, no anxiety, no weight. For the first time in my life, the fear that had followed me since childhood was completely gone. I had no idea that what I was about to experience would destroy everything I thought I understood about talking to God. And then I saw Him, Jesus. He was walking toward me from inside the light, the way a father walks toward a child who has been lost and finally found. I knew Him instantly, not from icons, not from paintings. I knew Him the way your lungs know air. His eyes held no judgment, no disappointment, only a love so vast and so personal that it made every human love I had ever experienced feel like a shadow. He did not speak with words at first. He placed His hand on my chest, directly over my heart, and I felt everything inside me open. Every prayer I had ever prayed came rushing to the surface. Thousands of them, years of them, and for the first time I could see them the way God saw them. That is when it happened. The moment that changed everything I believed about prayer. Jesus showed me a vision. I saw millions of Christians on their knees, in churches, in bedrooms, in cars, in hospital rooms. They were praying with passion, with tears, with clenched fists and desperate voices. But something was wrong. I watched their prayers rise from their mouths like smoke, and as they rose, most of them hit an invisible barrier and scattered. They never reached heaven. They dissolved before they arrived. I was horrified. Why? I cried. They love you. Why can you not hear them? Jesus looked at me with eyes full of grief and said, I hear every word. The barrier is not mine. It is theirs. And the reason is simpler and more painful than they want to believe. He showed me something I will carry with me until the day I die for real. He showed me the prayers up close. And He showed me what was hidden inside them. He said, watch, listen to what they are truly saying. I leaned in, I listened, and I heard it. Underneath the beautiful words, underneath the scripture quotes and the worship language and the proper endings, there was another voice, a deeper voice. And it was saying something completely different from what the mouth was saying. The mouth said, Lord, I trust you. The heart said, but I do not believe you will actually do it. The mouth said, your will be done. The heart said, but please do what I want. The mouth said, I surrender everything to you. The heart said, but I am still holding on to my plan in case you fail. Jesus said, "This is why millions of prayers dissolve before they reach my throne. Not because I am ignoring them, but because the mouth and the heart are praying two different prayers, and I do not listen to the mouth, I listen to the heart. When your lips say trust but your heart says doubt, your heart is the prayer I hear. And doubt is not a prayer I can answer, because doubt is an agreement with the enemy that I am not who I say I am." I fell to my knees in that golden space. Tears poured from my eyes, because I saw it. I saw my own prayers, years and years of beautiful, eloquent, faithful-sounding prayers, and underneath every single one of them, my heart had been whispering something different. My heart had been saying, "I do not really believe you will come through." My heart had been hedging, keeping a backup plan, praying with my mouth pointed toward heaven and my heart pointed toward fear. I had no idea that I had been canceling my own prayers with my own unbelief for my entire life. Jesus knelt beside me. He lifted my face with both hands and he said, "The real reason I seem silent is not that I do not hear. It is that my children speak to me with divided hearts. And a divided heart creates a divided prayer, and a divided prayer has no power. When the heart and the mouth agree, that prayer moves heaven. When they do not, the prayer goes nowhere." He showed me one more thing. He showed me a single woman in a small room. She was not eloquent. She was not quoting scripture. She had no prayer journal. She simply knelt on a bare floor and said 5 words. "Jesus, I believe you completely." And I watched that prayer rise. It did not scatter. It did not dissolve. It went straight through every barrier like a beam of light and landed at the feet of God. Because her mouth and her heart were saying the same thing. Then I heard a sound, a rhythmic beeping. The golden light began to fade. I felt weight returning to my body. Cold air entered my lungs. I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights and a team of doctors standing over me. A nurse was weeping. The surgeon said, "She is back." I had been dead for 6 minutes, but what I learned in those 6 minutes was worth more than 30 years of living. What happened next changed everything. Ask yourself this question. How do you explain standing before the living God and being shown that the prayers you were so proud of were broken from the inside? I could not speak for 3 days. Not because my throat was damaged, because I had no words large enough for what I had seen. On the 4th day, the hospital chaplain visited me. He was a quiet Jordanian priest with deep wrinkles and kind hands. I told him everything. The death, the light, Jesus, the vision of millions of prayers dissolving, the divided heart. He listened with his eyes closed and his hands folded. When I finished, he opened his Bible to James 1:6-8 and read, "The one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do." He looked at me and said, "He loves you, daughter. He has been waiting for you to pray with your whole heart." I broke. I surrendered right there, not for the first time, but for the real time. I said, "Jesus, I have been praying with a divided heart my entire life." My mouth said one thing and my heart whispered another. I am done. I believe you completely. Not with my words, with everything inside me. Forgive me for doubting you while pretending to trust you. I give you all of it. Every fear, every backup plan, every part of me that held back. And for the first time in my life, I felt my prayer leave my body and go somewhere. I felt it arrive. I felt heaven receive it. The cost of speaking this truth was higher than I expected. When I shared what Jesus showed me, not everyone wanted to hear it. My father sat across the kitchen table and said, "You had a hallucination from the anesthesia. Do not repeat this. It will embarrass our family." My mother closed her prayer journal and looked at me with pain in her eyes and said, "Are you saying my prayers were wrong? After everything I have given to God?" She did not speak to me for 2 weeks. George, my fiancé, listened with his arms crossed and said, "This is not sound theology, Salma. You are telling people their prayers do not work. That is dangerous." He placed the engagement ring on the table 3 days later and said, "I cannot marry someone who tells Christians their faith is not enough." He left. The women's prayer circle that had welcomed me since childhood asked me not to return. The priest suggested I take time away from ministry until I recovered. I had no idea that the truth Jesus showed me would cost me almost every relationship I valued. Within months, I lost my fiancé, my standing in the church, and the easy warmth of my family. That is when it happened for the second time. Not a vision, a quiet knowing that settled deep in my bones. I had lost everything comfortable, but I gained everything that truly matters. A real relationship with Jesus, not built on performance or religious habit, but on the raw, undivided honesty he had been waiting for all along. 8 months after my surgery, I found a small house church in Amman filled with people who were hungry for truth over tradition. I was baptized in the Jordan River on a warm October morning. I kept my name, Salma, because it means peace, and for the first time in my life, I actually had it. It was in that church that I met Nathaniel. He was a Palestinian Christian worship leader with a quiet faith that did not need to perform for anyone. I told him everything: the death, Jesus, the prayers, the cost. He listened with tears in his eyes and said, "That is the most important thing I have ever heard." We were married 5 months later in a small ceremony by the river. The hospital chaplain who had first heard my testimony officiated. Today, I spend my life sharing what Jesus revealed to me during those 6 minutes. I travel across Jordan, Lebanon, and the Gulf states, speaking in churches, home groups, and online. Over 120 people have told me that hearing my testimony transformed the way they pray. Not because they changed their words, because they finally aligned their hearts with their mouths. I returned to St. Joseph's Hospital last year. I stood in the same hallway where my heart stopped. I placed my hand on the wall and whispered, "Thank you for letting me die so I could finally learn to pray." I still write letters to my mother every month. Last Christmas, she wrote back for the first time. It said only, "I have been thinking about what you told me." I hold those 9 words like treasure. My father has not spoken to me, but I will never stop reaching out. I had no idea that dying would be the thing that finally taught me how to live. Ask yourself this question: if you could see your own prayers the way God sees them, would your mouth and your heart be saying the same thing? The woman who lay on that operating table with a divided heart and a lifetime of unanswered prayers no longer exists. In her place stands a daughter of Jesus Christ who has learned that the shortest, honest prayer outweighs 1,000 eloquent performances. If he can transform someone like me, someone who prayed for decades without ever truly believing, someone who had to die to discover that her own doubt was the wall between her and heaven, then he can absolutely transform you. No matter what you have done or where you come from. The same Jesus who knelt beside me in that golden light and showed me why millions of prayers go unanswered is standing before you right now through this very testimony. He is not asking for prettier words. He is not asking for longer prayers. He is asking for one thing: honesty. Complete, terrifying, undivided honesty between your mouth and your heart. Look inside your own heart right now. Jesus is calling you right now. Tomorrow morning, when you bow your head and open your mouth to pray, will you let him in to the places you have been hiding? And will you finally pray the one prayer that heaven has been waiting to hear? The prayer where your heart and your lips finally say the same thing?